Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to do a horror recommendation video based off of horror movies that you enjoyed. And I've done similar videos to this, usually where I'm pairing up books with other books. And as I've said before, I love to film these videos and I also love to watch them, so I hope that you'll enjoy them too. I'm going to keep the movies and of course the books as well, all spoiler free. And I'm going to have timestamps down below if you want to jump around to a particular movie. But otherwise, I think I have some good pairings here. I hope you agree, and let's get started. So first I want to talk about the movie Get Out, which is a personal favorite of mine. And this movie follows a boyfriend who is going on a road trip with his girlfriend to meet her family. And when they get there, let's say that things are just really uncomfortable. Everyone is acting very strange around him. And as the movie progresses, things just get more and more uncomfortable. And you get to the point that you as a viewer are just yelling at him to get out because you know something is terribly wrong, and the story of course goes from there. I really enjoyed this movie, highly recommend it if you somehow have not yet seen it, and I have a book pairing for a story that I thought gave me a really similar feel. And the book that I want to recommend if you love Get Out is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And this one is set in historical Mexico and follows a young woman, a socialite named Noemi, who is tasked with going off to find out how her cousin is doing because her cousin recently got married after kind of a whirlwind affair, and their family is getting strange letters from her saying that she is sick, that she's not well, and they are just concerned. And so she goes off to visit her cousin and then has some rather uncomfortable interactions with her cousin's in-laws. And the family's just strange. It's clear that they are hiding something, and she just has some really uncomfortable feelings. She just feels very unsettled in the house. And this book, as you can imagine, had a similar reading experience. While as I was turning the pages, I didn't know what was happening, but I had a sense that something was terribly wrong, that something was going to happen. And so I found myself just yelling at Noemi to get out of the house, to get out, to get out. I also, of course, want to mention that both books have some interesting, diverse messaging within them, some good social commentary. Obviously, Get Out is focused around Black Americans, while this is of course focused on a Mexican family. But both of these stories really take these cultures and have this outside Caucasian perspective, these colonial ideas, and it's just so well woven into the story. You know it's part of the story. You don't know if it's the reason for the horror or if it's something else. I don't want to say too much, but it gave me very similar vibes. And so if you're looking for a Mexican version of Get Out, I highly recommend checking out this book. It's so well done and just has some fantastic character work, some great suspense, and it's so well written. Next up, we have Vampires vs. the Bronx, and this is a Netflix movie that takes place in Brooklyn, as you would expect from that title, and it's set in a predominantly Black community. However, there are corporations that are coming in and buying out the Black store owners, and the community members are just moving away, and so the residency is becoming more and more white as things progress. And this story of course has a horror spin because from the title you can guess that, well, maybe that's what's happening, or well, maybe it's vampires. And I read a book that gave me very similar feels to that. It had a very similar plot actually. And that book is When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. And I want to preface this by saying that this book is very light in terms of horror and in some ways read more like a contemporary romance. But if you enjoy the premise of Vampires vs. the Bronx and are looking to read a story like that, this one is definitely my go-to pick. This also is set in a predominantly Black community in the US where they are getting pushed out in order to make room for white neighbors to be moving in. And the story is told from two different perspectives, one being a woman who is really trying to preserve the community. She is a bit of a local historian, and she's just very concerned to see the changes that are happening. She is worried that people are getting pressured, that something more is going on. And then the story is also told from the perspective of a white male who is coming into the community, and they form a bit of a relationship, a bit of a romance, and together they start to investigate what is happening. happening. Now, Alyssa Cole is predominantly a romance author, which is why I mentioned that that is a really big part of the plot. And in terms of the horror, it's very light. I would argue that this book is more of a thriller, but it has the beats of a horror book, so it definitely has a similar narrative. And when I was watching Vampires in the Bronx, which I watched after reading this book, I felt like they had just stolen the plot because they are so similar. They go in different directions. I won't say what the horror or suspense element of Alyssa Cole's book is, so it's not exactly the same, but definitely it has that same setup, it has that same social commentary, and if you enjoy something like that, I would really recommend giving it a try. Next, for those of you that share my love for the movie Us, which is about a family that go on vacation to their family cabin, which is near a beach. They spend the day there, but when they return back to their cabin at night, they are visited by strangers that appear to look exactly like their family. And soon enough, they get into the house and it becomes a struggle and a bit of a home invasion. This story definitely goes to further places, but I don't want to give away more of the plot, so I will just say that I'm going to recommend a book based off the initial setup of that one. So the book that I want to recommend is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, and this follows a gay couple who are vacationing with their young adopted daughter Wen, and they have strangers that show up at their door telling them that the world is about to end and they need to get into their cabin, they need their help because in order to prevent the world from ending, they need the family to make a terrible choice. Now, I want to recommend this as a pairing to us because both stories involve a home invasion. They are also both very focused on a family, and so keeping the family together, protecting their family is very centered to the plot. Both of these get very emotional and both are very suspenseful. Now, I mentioned for those of you that have watched Us, you know that there is more to that story, so I don't want to say that this one is necessarily going to fulfill those other elements of the story. If you know what I'm talking about, you understand. Otherwise, I'm trying to keep this spoiler free. But if you enjoy the beginning of Us especially and really want something that will give you that sense of suspense and dread, just worrying for the family's sake, worrying that something terrible is going to happen, highly recommend this one. It's so claustrophobic, it's so intense, and probably has less action than the movie that I'm comparing it to, but I could not stop turning the pages and I was just gripped in by the story. So if that sounds good, if you have not read this one, highly recommend. The next movie I want to talk about is Black Swan, which is a psychological thriller slash horror movie that is all centered around ballet. It of course stars Natalie Portman, which is reason enough to watch it. And in terms of a comparable, I want to suggest a horror novella, and that is Mara by Richard Denny. This follows a young aspiring ballerina who is desperate to get ahead and perform in her dance, and in doing so she ends up starting to hear voices that are telling her to do terrible things, telling her to possibly take out the competition. And I want to recommend these two stories together for several reasons. One being the obvious that they both are horror stories that involve ballet, which is definitely an area I really enjoy to read and watch. But also these stories are both very psychological in nature. So in Mara, we are very much in the character's head. She is hearing voices, and we get to experience that from a very close perspective, and it's very intimate and quiet and creepy and disturbing, and that is the same thing that you'll get with Black Swan. So highly recommend the novella. In my opinion, it is far too underrated and is just really well done. Huge content warnings. It definitely deals with some difficult subject matter, but I think that it is a taut, tight story and is a really good comp for those of you that love Black Swan. After that, for movies, I want to recommend Witch, which is a movie that is set during the Puritan era and follows a family who has been banished from their colony, and they go off to the woods and supernatural or terrible things ensue, as you would expect. And the book that I want to compare to it is Slewfoot by Brom, and this is a historical horror book that has a very similar setup because it is also set during the Puritan era. This one follows a young woman whose husband has recently died, and so she is being pressured to remarry, and by disobeying what the authorities are telling her to do, she is seen as an outcast and is really seen as something else, possibly a witch. And she becomes friendly with a being called the Slewfoot that is also a bit of an outsider, as you would expect. Now, I'll be honest, the book and the movie were just not simply to my taste, and that's the fact that I don't really like Puritan horror. I don't like that time period in terms of historical fiction in general. And so these are times where I appreciated the stories, but I didn't personally love them. But I thought that they were both very well done. And so if you enjoy one, I would very much recommend trying out the other, because again, my only criticisms were that they did not match my personal taste, but I thought that the stories themselves were very similar. Obviously the setting, the tone, and of course, when it ever comes to Brom, he has beautiful illustrations, which I think will be very reflective to those of you that like the cinematography of the movie as well. So if that sounds up your alley, highly recommend. Again, the pairing should work in either direction, so let me know what you think in the comments. And last, I want to recommend a book for those of you that love The Quiet Place, which is a movie that involves a family that is running for their lives. There has been an outbreak of these mysterious creatures that appear to hunt by sound, and so the family has learned how to become very quiet in order to survive. The story follows a mother and father along with their children, which includes one child who is deaf, and so in a way she has an advantage because she is used to living in a silent world. In other ways it's challenging because she is not always aware of the sounds that she makes, and you get to see how the family adapts their lives in order to be as quiet as possible. Now, if you enjoyed the movie and are looking for a book with a similar plot and setup, I would very much recommend The Silence by Tim Leben. This follows a family who is on the run from a creature that has broken out of caves where they were excavating, and they accidentally broke out this ancient evil. And these creatures also hunt by sound, and so this family also has to go on the run and go on a bit of a road trip in order to get away. They also, like the family in the movie, have a daughter who is deaf, and so again they lean on her expertise. They use a lot of sign language throughout the book, and you get to see how that is incorporated in the story. Now, from what I just said, you probably have a pretty strong idea why I'm pairing this movie with this book, and that's the fact that they have really, really similar concepts. I did a little bit of internet research, and as best I can tell, it just happens that one author and one screenwriter happened to come across really similar ideas and just write really similar stories. I don't believe there was any plagiarism, and I will say that both stories are very similar but also go in different directions, and your enjoyment of them will just depend on if you like where each of the stories goes and how they tell that story. So if you enjoy one, you might want to try the other. And I do want to mention, of course, that The Silence got its own adaptation. And so if you enjoy that, you can also go check it out, which I believe is on Netflix. So that's another book or movie to try as well. So that is it for this video. I would love to hear down below, of the books I talked about and the movies, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? I would also love to hear your feedback. Do you agree or disagree on these pairings? Do you think they work? Or perhaps do you have better pairings that you would suggest? I would also love to hear if there are other movies you would like me to find book pairings to go along with. Admittedly, I read a lot more horror than I watch, but I'm definitely open to working towards doing another version of this video if you enjoyed it enough. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, thrillers, fantasy, and science fiction. And if you enjoyed this video, you can also help me out by sharing it around online, giving it that little thumbs up, and hitting that little notification bell so you never miss a video from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.